Project initiation is the process of formally conceiving, approving, and launching a new project. You don't even really have a project until the appropriate stakeholders have approved it during initiation. And I believe strongly that the time and thought invested during initiation lays the groundwork for all of the project work that follows. Now, many of you are probably project managers or looking to be project managers, and if not, you've certainly worked with project managers. And all project managers know of certain steps to take at the beginning of a project. They need to do things like develop a business case, write a project charter, obtain sponsorship and funding, assign a project manager, assemble the team and acquire other resources, develop a project plan, and so forth. I'm so confident that you already know about these essentials that, with the exception of developing a project charter, I won't even talk about them this morning. However, it might be afternoon where you are. It's morning where I am on the West Coast. However, numerous other activities are also vital to getting a project off to a good start. And unfortunately, project managers sometimes gloss over these steps. Maybe they haven't had enough experience to realize how important these steps are. Or perhaps they don't feel they can spend the time during the frenzy of project launch. But seasoned managers know that attending to these critical activities can separate success from failure. So this presentation describes several practices that help lay the foundation for a successful project, actions to take during project initiation. So what does success mean? Well, consultant Tim Lister defined project success, and I really like this quote, as meeting all the requirements and constraints imposed by the key stakeholders. Now, if you don't deal with these factors early in the project, there's a good chance you won't be entirely successful. Let me point out that my main website shown on the slide here is processimpact.com. I invite you to visit there where there's a lot of useful materials that you might find helpful. But I have a new website that goes along with this book called projectinitiation.com, and we'll show you more about that at the end of the presentation. So at projectinitiation.com, you can access and download all of the worksheets that I have in the book, because it really is a handbook, and I encourage people to try to practice these techniques that I talk about on their project right away. And also, there's a variety of other work aids and process assets and things that are available there. So the project initiation practices that I'm going to describe are grouped into the 4 categories shown here. Things you do to, in general, prepare for success. Some aspects of planning for reality, because reality is what we have to deal with. You know, I'm not all that crazy about reality. Sometimes reality isn't very pleasant, but the fact is that is what we have to deal with, and so we have to live with reality whether we like it or not. We have to talk a little bit about ways to measure what happens on a project, and then finally I want to wrap up with some suggestions about learning continuously so that every project you work on goes better than the project you worked on before. Now, in my view, there really is no such thing as project management. Instead, what we call project management is a combination of managing many other project elements. It's a blend of, perhaps most importantly, people management, but also requirements management, risk management. And the flip side of a risk is an opportunity, so we need to manage our opportunities. Change management, because change is a reality on every project. Expectation management, a very important aspect of working with your customers so they know what's realistically achievable. Commitment management, so that we only make promises to each other that are realistically achievable. Resource management. Technology management. Supplier management, if you're getting any information or materials from outside sources. And everyone's favorite part, conflict management. So in the synthesis, these things constitute project management, but I think it's important to recognize that project management as a discrete thing, I'm not sure that exists. It's all these other things. So let's take a look at some of the activities and practices that can help prepare your project for a successful and happy outcome. A good place to start is by identifying the various project stakeholders and understanding what's important to them. What kind of value do they seek from the product? Or what kind of influence do they hope to exert on the way the project goes? We can define a stakeholder as being any individual or group who could be actively involved in a project, they could be affected by its outcome, or they can influence its outcome. Projects always have a lot of stakeholders, probably more stakeholders than you're aware of at the outset. These could be internal or external to the organization or to the project team. So when you're doing your stakeholder analysis, look for stakeholders that maybe aren't obvious. For example, you might be building a product that has to go through some kind of a certification process, maybe Underwriters Laboratories certification before you can declare victory and move on. In which case, the certification people are a stakeholder in the project, but they certainly have different expectations and participation than many of the other kinds of stakeholders. It's important to determine how you would assess, or how each stakeholder would assess, whether the project was a success from their point of view. How would they assess success? So therefore, let's perform some kind of a stakeholder analysis. And here's a little template that you can use to identify some information about each of your stakeholders. This is obviously very simplified just to give us an idea. But it's helpful to understand, for example, the attitudes that the different stakeholders have towards the project or product. What benefits do they expect to receive from it? What are their interests or win conditions? In other words, what are they hoping for as a desired outcome of this project? Interests might include financial benefits, maybe a specific time to market in a commercial environment, required functionality that's present, hitting certain performance targets. There could be usability, reliability, or other quality characteristics. So we're looking at what's important to those particular stakeholders. Also, you need to learn about any constraints that each stakeholder group might impose on the project. For example, you might have certain stakeholders that are using computers that are a little more old and a little bit more limited in capabilities, and so that's going to impose a constraint. So you might not be able to use the latest, greatest hardware or technologies that are going to suck a lot of those hardware resources. So we need to understand that. Other stakeholders might have limitations in what kind of training they're willing to impose on their employees to use a new system. Now, as you're going through this, you can count on encountering stakeholders with conflicting objectives. You better expect that. And because the project likely can't fully satisfy every stakeholder's interests, you need to decide which of those stakeholders carry more weight than others. These are those key stakeholders that Tim Lister mentioned in his definition of success that I gave a few minutes ago. Not everybody always gets what they want. I worked at Kodak for many years, and as one of my key customers that I worked with on several projects there said, Kodak is not a democracy. We don't just vote, and we don't necessarily try to make sure everybody gets what they want. We have to make sure that our objectives are aligned with the business success, and that means perhaps certain stakeholders might be a little bit disappointed. So with this idea of success, another thing you want to do very early in the project is to talk about the success criteria. How are these stakeholders going to determine success? One of the habits from Stephen Covey's very interesting book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is to begin with the end in mind. And one aspect of beginning with the end in mind is to determine what these success indicators are going to be. Here are some possible types of success criteria. They might not all apply to your project, but they'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Maybe meeting schedule or budget is considered a sign of success, but certainly it doesn't do you any good if you deliver on schedule and budget, but your customers hate the product. So customer satisfaction is another important indicator. I think it's also important to consider team member satisfaction. You do not want to end up meeting schedule and budget at the expense of completely destroying your team and their desire to work on a project again in the future. Market share is one commercial indication of success, as is sales revenue. For business systems, information systems, then perhaps what you're looking for is cost savings or streamlining your business processes to increase the throughput. You might also want to retire some legacy systems or technologies. Maybe one of the objectives of some project is you can finally get rid of that old VAX computer with the Fortran compiler on it that you're still paying license fees for. So there's no right answer. I don't suggest that these are all going to apply to your